morning, everyone. I understand that the state law currently requires that the following announcement be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing as follows. Due to the current public health emergency, city council committees are currently meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view and offer public testimony at public hearings of council meetings are included in the public hearing notices that are published in the Daily News, Enquirer, and Legal Intelligencer prior to the hearings and can also be found on phlcouncil.com. Will the clerk please call the roll to take attendance? Members that are in attendance will please indicate that they are present when their names are called. Also, please say a few brief words when responding so that your image will be displayed on screen when you speak. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Isaiah Thomas.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues. I'm present.
Councilmember Derek Green.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, viewing public. I am present.
Councilmember Helen Kim.
Good morning, Council Chair, and I am present.
Councilmember Kendra Brooks.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and colleagues. I am present.
And also present, Councilmember Katherine Gilmore Richardson.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, and good morning, colleagues of the Public Safety Committee. I am present.
Mr. Chair, you are on mute.
Thank you. A quorum of the committee is present, and this hearing is now called to order. This is the public hearing of the Committee on Public Safety regarding Bill number 210503. Will the clerk please read the title of the bill?
Bill number 210503, amending Chapter 10-300 entitled Minors to revise the evening curfew hours, modify the provisions for enforcement and penalties, and make technical changes all under certain terms and conditions.
Thank you. Before we begin to hear testimony from the witnesses we have for today, everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that this public hearing is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and viewers have to have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to being recorded. Additionally, prior to recognizing members for the questions or comments they have for witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available in Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. I would now like to invite the sponsor of the bill, Councilmember Katherine Gilmore Richardson, to make opening remarks before we begin hearing testimony.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and good morning, colleagues. Thank you all very, very much for being here today, particularly under these circumstances. But this committee, under the leadership of Councilmember Jones and with strong support from Councilmember Johnson, has worked diligently to address some of the most important issues that are facing our city today, and that would include police reform, criminal justice reform, and violence prevention. So I want to thank each and every one of you for your work on the Public Safety Committee. Today we will hear testimony on Bill 210503, which will reform Philadelphia's minor curfew law. This law is something that I'm very, very familiar with as I worked on the last iteration of the curfew bill before the sunset provision, the last bill that was heard in council about a decade ago as a legislative aide for former council member Blondell Reynolds Brown. But as I stated, that bill had a sunset provision. So here we are, now back to a space and place where we have a minor curfew that varies based on age, day of the week, time of the year. And it's very, very confusing for parents and for young people and for the enforcement agencies. It means we have a curfew on the books, but we don't know if and how it is really being implemented and who it's really impacting. When we are facing soaring rates of gun violence, especially among young people, we have clear laws that can be easily enforced fairly and consistently. But we also are all working to ensure that we address systematic inequities in our city and policing and criminal justice that disproportionately impact communities of color and low-income communities. So punitive fines and fees rack up, which can impact someone's ability to access any needed support services or lead to issues with the criminal justice system. And taking young people who violate a civil rule to police districts does not get to the root of why many young people are out late at night, or if they need anything to help them in their lives relative to resources and or community support. So that's why I wanted to remove the fines and change the language around where young people are taken for curfew violations. We need to be providing community-based resources for people who are in need or at risk of getting caught up in dangerous situations. This bill and the new evening resource centers will help us do just that. So I wanted to first thank the members of the committee who have co-sponsored the legislation: Councilmember Brooks, Councilmember Green, Councilmember Gim, Councilmember Johnson, and Councilmember Thomas. I also want to thank the witnesses who have joined us today to testify, and the administration, especially Deputy Mayor Cynthia Figueroa. Thank you very, very much for answering the call and for meeting with Councilmember Johnson and I over the last several months, and Commissioner Kimberly Ali, Deputy Commissioner Joel Dales, Deputy Managing Director Vanessa Garrett Harley, and Erica Atwood for the time you've put into this effort and for your continued partnership. To Councilmember Gim for the youth and young people conversations that you hosted. They were very, very helpful. And I also want to thank today's committee chair, my colleague and friend, Councilmember Johnson, for your tireless work to make our city safer and more equitable, and for all the support you have given me throughout this entire process. I thank you very, very much for your leadership and for your work on this issue long before you were a member of Philadelphia City Council, pushing us to create a special committee on gun violence and looking at the issues that are impacting young people on a daily basis. You were talking about this before it was popular. So I want to say thank you for your steadfast leadership and for your support in ensuring that we can create a network around our city that provides the needed resources to young people so that they're not caught up in these unfortunate situations. So I'm looking forward to today's conversation. I do want to add for all of my colleagues that, you know, we are in the midst of a process, and it's just that, a process, and we have to trust the process, as they say. But we will continue to work with the administration, and we're committed to working with the administration to ensure that we can set up a model that is advantageous to young people. We have to understand that the model that was in play when the curfew bills were being talked about heavy, that model and that infrastructure and that community-based network, that no longer exists. So we have to work together so that we can create and recreate that community-based model that we know will be helpful to young people and all the community-based organizations that help us with that work. So with that, Mr. Chair, I pass it to you so we can begin the hearing. Thank you very, very much. And thank you for your latitude today relative to chairing the committee in the absence of my district council member and colleague, Councilmember Jones.
You're welcome. And I just want to acknowledge you for your hard work around this particular issue. For me, it's all about the short term and the long term. And I believe when it comes to saving our youth, we have to look at all the strategies that are available when it comes to providing them positive outlets to become productive members of our society. And that starts with supporting them, supporting their parents. And this type of initiative that you are working on will allow them to receive the type of support that they deserve. And so I just want to thank you. I want to thank Cynthia and her team as well as Kimberly Ali for working in partnership with us to come up with strategies and solutions to address the senseless gun violence that's pervading our city right now. But most importantly, having an impact on our young people and how we can address it from a non-punitive approach. And so again, I just want to say thank you, Councilwoman Katherine Gilmore Richardson, for your leadership. Would a clerk please call the first panel?
We have Kimberly Ali, and also available for questions, we have Lieutenant Kelly Robbins and Erica Atwood.
Good morning, Councilmember Johnson and Jones and members of the Committee on Public Safety. My name is Kimberly Ali, and I am the Commissioner of the City of Philadelphia Department of Human Services. I am here with members of my leadership team to testify to Bill number 210503, an ordinance amending Chapter 10-300 to revise the evening curfew hours for youth in Philadelphia and provide for an alternate location to bring those youth who are found to be in violation. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. We appreciate the collaboration our office had with Councilmember Katherine Gilmore Richardson and Councilmember Kenyatta Johnson on developing a strategy to engage at-risk youth. DHS is charged with providing a full array of prevention and diversion services, such as intensive prevention services designed to prevent entry and further penetration into both the child welfare and juvenile justice systems. We are fully committed to partnering with City Council, the Managing Director's Office, and the Philadelphia Police Department to provide safe options for at-risk youth found violating curfew. One DHS strategy is to pilot evening resource centers, which are designed to support police operations by offering a safe place to bring youth after curfew. The centers will offer site-based services and structured activities to engage young people. Additionally, youth will also be linked to other prevention services offered by DHS and other city agencies. Again, thank you for the opportunity to testify on Bill number 210503. The administration is committed to exploring ways to best implement the bill and looks forward to ongoing collaboration to keep our youth safe in the community. My team and I are available for questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments from members of the committee?
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to be recognized as present.
Yes, I want to acknowledge Councilwoman Jamie Gardier is present. Any other questions, comments from members of the committee? Hearing none. Yes, Catherine.
Yes. I'm not a member of the committee, so that's why I was waiting until.
I'm sorry. I will now acknowledge the sponsor of the bill, Councilwoman Katherine Gilmore Richardson.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to thank Commissioner Ali for her work and partnership in the meetings that we've had. And we're committed to continuing to work with you all to really build out a community-based model that will be advantageous for youth. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Hearing none, thank you very much for your testimony. Will the clerk please call the next witness?
We have Katherine Parker.
Just state your name for the record, Ms. Parker, and you can begin.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair. My name is Katherine Parker. And good morning, members of the Public Safety Committee. I'm an attorney with the Defender Association of Philadelphia. I serve as the agency's Director of Policy and Practice. And on behalf of Defender, I'm very thankful for the opportunity for you to hear our testimony today and consider our perspective. I'd like to thank Councilwoman Gilmore Richardson and all of the co-sponsors of Bill 210503 for your efforts today to eliminate some of the draconian financial penalties currently imposed by our code for youth curfew violations, and for your work to really decriminalize, or at least remove the indicia of criminalization for behavior that for many children is just ordinary youthful conduct. We support these efforts. We also encourage this committee and council to consider even further repeals of Section 10-300 in your upcoming sessions. I know that folks have copies of our written testimony. I don't want to belabor the point of the history of youth curfew laws, both in our city and in municipalities across the country, or the acknowledgement now that they might not necessarily be effective in actually reducing juvenile delinquency or in preventing youth from becoming victims of crime. What our bill and our code currently is effective at is imposing financial burdens on some of the most economically marginalized people and families in our community and in our city. And so we're very grateful that this bill removes those draconian penalties and creates in its place opportunities for law enforcement to actually provide meaningful interventions and supports for children and families who might need them. As you all are aware, the current bill does not permit law enforcement with a lot of different options or a lot of discretions about referring children to community supports and services. Their hands are in large part tied about what they are allowed to do with children who they observe unsupervised in late night hours throughout the city. And this bill remedies that challenge. In terms of the impact, this is an issue that impacts dozens of Philadelphians and their families every week. From 2014 until the first quarter of 2021, Philadelphia police officers reportedly investigated 13,970 people for alleged curfew violations. In our written materials that we've submitted to council, we did map them out by police service agency so that as you continue your work to develop community-based local resource centers for children, you're able to really use that map as a needs assessment for the communities that you're trying to serve. 43% of the people stopped, or 6,968 of them, were actually adults, age 18 to 21. And so these different supports available in the way that we're shifting the way that we treat curfew violations should really limit unnecessary contact between communities of color and law enforcement in this city. Most of the people who were stopped were African American, mostly in West Philadelphia. And so this is not an issue that's evenly shared throughout the city. Aside from requiring the officers to collect personal identifying information, as I mentioned, our current code doesn't provide them with a lot of options about how best to intervene for children and families who might need help and support. There's currently no provisions that contemplate or permit officers to refer children to community resource centers or create other safe neighborhood-based spaces for unsupervised children or their families to receive support. And so we do support the work that's being done here. I believe I'd be completely remiss as the largest provider of indigent defense in the Commonwealth if we didn't state for the record that the current code has a devastating impact for families throughout the city. The structured and staggered and subsequent progressive sanctions and fines can easily rack up $800, $1,000 in fines and penalties for one family. And so for these reasons, we do support these efforts to provide meaningful interventions for youth. And we are available to council, to this committee, to the bill sponsors, if we can be of any assistance in identifying areas of need based on the current investigatory information that we do analyze. Thank you very much for your time and for your service.
Thank you very much for your testimony. The chair now recognizes Councilman Katherine Gilmore Richardson.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I wanted to thank Kate for her testimony and for all of her work. We have been working with her very, very closely, and just for all of the information and data provided. I did want to ask a question because we asked this question of our city's law department relative to further next steps we can take beyond this legislation relative to who can interact and interface with young people on the street outside of the Philadelphia Police Department. So if you don't mind elaborating on that a little more and giving us some more context around that part of the conversation.
So in terms, and if I understand the council member's question, it's that these community-based resource centers that would be available for police to drop children off to, it actually would be deeply rooted agencies in the community. And so we could get back to a time where neighbors and residents who observe children who are unsupervised are able to make those recommendations themselves as well. And we don't necessarily need law enforcement to be the sole intervention point for kids who maybe need some additional helps and supports. If your neighbor sees you out and you're 14, 15 years old and it's 1 o'clock in the morning, they can refer you and actually walk you to some of these places that council's contemplating.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that, Kate. I think my question was, we have young people that may or may not be picked up, let's say at 2 o'clock in the morning, for example, right? And instead of a police officer doing that work, could someone else be tasked with doing that? We received that question, which was why we wanted to meet with law and understand right now legally who has the legal authority to actually, pick up the young people on the street and then take them to the community center.
Councilwoman, I would have to do a little more research on that before I stated that with absolute certainty. But I don't see any reason other than the fact of the youthfulness for, say, public safety officers, other members from Health and Human Services to make these sorts of transports, so long as there's effective policies in place when a guardian or a parent cannot necessarily be reached to give consent. But if a parent can be reached and contacted, I don't see why they couldn't consent to the transportation of their child to the centers themselves.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. The chair now recognizes Councilman Helen Kim.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, to the bill sponsor for her work on ensuring that the current regulations do not punish young people through fines and fees and other types of punitive measures. And thank you, of course, to Kate for your tremendous work in this area as well. I wanted to ask a little bit about whether, the Defenders Association talked a little bit about the effectiveness of curfew laws in general. And I think what the council sponsor is doing, which is very effective, is trying to move it away from a punitive juvenile law and more towards a support and resource center for young people who could be at risk. But I'm wondering whether, how you're thinking about this as we go forward in terms of your advice on how to look at, the law overall.
That's for me, Councilmember Kim?
Yes, correct.
So our recommendation, we don't call for wholesale reforms that are unnecessarily swift. But if we look at the history of many of the curfew laws that are present here in Philadelphia, but also in municipalities across the country, a lot of them reflect a lingering view that unsupervised children, particularly Black and brown children in the city, are responsible for rises in crime and in delinquency. They come from a very 90s tough on crime approach that embraced the view that some children were quote unquote super predators. They were very heavy on punishment and not very heavy on rehabilitation, support, or remodeling of good citizenship. And so as council moves forward, we would encourage council to look at the evidence as to whether or not this is an evidence-based practice. Do you see decreases in victimization or in delinquency acts during these curfew times? Or are there other times of the day really where you see the lion's share of engagement in behaviors that might require a criminal justice response? When I reviewed some of the recent studies, I think the most recent one was from 2016, it looked at about 12 different evaluations of various municipalities, and it found no correlation between the juvenile curfew laws themselves and meaningful reduction in criminal behavior or victimization of youth. And so our position always is that we would encourage council to use data to drive the policy itself, and if it's not working, be bold and not fearful in supporting change. I want to say no one wants to create a situation where children are not receiving the supports that they need, and that some of these behaviors may, particularly kids who are unsupervised in the early morning hours, may actually indicate a need for this support. could actually just be a kid walking home from one cousin's house to another, right? And that the challenge that we see is that sometimes children are cloaked really in this presumption of suspicion that they don't deserve, and that as we move forward, it might be worth continuing to pilot further repeals of the curfew law and replacing them with increased investments in community support.
Thank you very much. And I do think that that is certainly in our discussions has been the bill sponsor's intent. And I know that it's an area that we'll continue to be working very closely with the Defenders Association on. Mr. Chair, is it possible to just ask a quick question of Commissioner Ali?
Sure.
Is still on. Commissioner, are you available? Thank you so much. I know that this bill isn't specifically about the centers, that because I know that that's ongoing work, but has there been discussion about whether there would be social workers, nurses, and trained folks available on site at these locations for 24 hours because working with young people, especially if they because of as we're continuing to explore what our options are about who is able to bring them in, we just want to make sure that they're in a place and that your curfew centers are well equipped to handle a range of emotions or situations that a young person may be experiencing should they be able to come in. And so I'm curious about whether there can be some brief comments on this. And I know this is not the main focus of this particular bill, but ultimately we're very invested on that area as well.
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Kim. So yes, there has been discussions around having social workers on site as well as peer mentors on site in order to engage the young people. We have not had any conversations about having nurses on site. However, certainly we can take that back to determine whether or not that is actually a need. The reason why the department is excited about partnering with council, certainly would love to have some conversations with Kate as well as our community-based providers, is because we view this as a pilot so that we can make the necessary adjustments to make sure that we are providing the necessary support to young people, to their families, and to the communities. And so at the point that we are able to stand these curfew centers up, evening reporting centers up, we will certainly look to adjust the model if necessary.
I appreciate that. And again, we've been talking a little bit about, as you said, the importance of being able to ensure that young people, if we bring them into a place that they're met with people who are easily able to de-escalate a situation, because I know your team and is uniquely trained around that. So as much support as we can do to ensure that these places are seen as receptive centers for help, resources, and connections. We'll look forward to partnering with you on that. So thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Any other questions or comments from members of the committee?
Mr. Chair.
Councilman Jamie Gaudier.
Thank you. First, I wanted to applaud the bill sponsor for all of her work on this bill, but also in helping the city to rethink the evening resource centers. She's put a lot of work into making sure that we have a more compassionate, less punitive, way of looking at curfews for children and for families. And I think that's important. I did want to be on record as saying that I also agree with, a lot of what was stated in the defender's testimony, that I think we should be pushing even further as a city to rethink these laws. First, it was very striking to me to see that almost half of the people stopped for curfew violations were actually adults. So I think it's important for us as a city to make sure that having a curfew law on the books is not an additional way for Black and brown people to have increased interactions with police just for existing in their communities. Secondly, I really would like for us to think about if there other ways of handling this than having police pick up young people to take them to the resource centers. Can there be a group of civilians that handles this work, since we are talking about children? As we rethink public safety in our city, is there a way to remove the law enforcement presence from these interactions, and ideally to get rid of these laws in total. I also wanted to circle back to the commissioner. I know in the line of questioning from Councilmember Kim, she talked about some of the things that they were thinking about with the evening resource centers, but I just wanted a fuller description of what would be available at these centers, how they would function, and where they would be located, particularly since I heard that most of the people picked up for curfew were in West Philadelphia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The chair recognizes Councilwoman Katherine Gilmore Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to thank my colleague, Councilmember Gaudier, for all of her work and for the questions that she offered. I just wanted to put on the record to one of her points relative to police and their interaction with young people around the curfew violations, that we have put forth that question to our city's law department. We have received an opinion back, so we know that we have further work to do around figuring out the best way and the best individuals for young people to interface with. The way our laws are currently written, we're trying to make this less punitive right now, so that the fine structure is eliminated and that we streamline the times. But we know that we have further work to do around the issue of young people's interaction with police. And we've already started that process with the law department. They have given us an opinion. So I just wanted to put it on the record, Mr. Chair, that we are going to continue to work with the law department and the defenders and others around that issue. Because initially we were saying, could we have social workers pick up the young people? And right now, the way things are, that's not a possibility. So we are going to continue to do that work.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments for this panel from members of the committee? Hearing none, want to thank
Mr. Chair. Wait,
yep.
Mr. Chair, I had tossed out a question for Commissioner Ali. I wanted a fuller description of the centers as they exist or as they will exist, and I wanted to know where they're going to be located.
Sure. The chair acknowledges Commissioner Kimberly Ali.
Yes, thank you for that question, Councilmember Gaudier. And so how we envision this pilot of the evening reporting centers, we actually want to start the program around 7 p.m. in the evening. And so the programming would run between 7 p.m. in the evening up until about 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. in the morning. Again, this is a work in progress, because our goal is we do not want this just to be a police intervention. We do want the community to be able to walk alongside these young people, and if appropriate, refer the young people to the evening resource center as well. Therefore, a majority of the program will actually occur in the evening prior to the curfews, so that, again, we can engage the young people. We envision that we'll have conflict resolution on site, so groups around conflict resolution, groups around anger management, some positive youth development, speakers to come and engage the young people. We'll have social workers on site to engage the young people, peer mentors on site to engage the young people. And what we are hoping is that if these are young people who continue to want to come back to the center, we will offer that resource for the young people beyond the fact that they were picked up on curfew. We have been working extremely hard since 2016 around ensuring that We have a prevention and intervention model as it relates to young people. And so we will continue with that and view the evening resource centers as just part of our continuum around prevention and intervening on behalf of young people. In terms of where the centers will be located, what we envision is that we will roll out a pilot according to the police divisions. So long term, we envision, if the pilot goes well, that we will have 6 evening reporting centers that are aligned with the police division. So we are talking about the East Police Division, Southwest, South, Northeast, Northwest, and Central.
Thank you.
Point of information, Commissioner Ali, may you repeat that once more? Thank you.
Yes, so we envision having the evening resource centers aligned with the police 6 divisions. So the 6 divisions is the East Division, the Southwest Division, the South Division, Northeast Division, Northwest Division, and Central Division.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Hearing none. Thank you both for your testimony. Will the clerk please call the next panelist?
Majida Rashid.
Good morning, everyone.
Hey, Majida, how are you?
I'm good. Good morning, honorable council members. My name is Majida Rashid. I'm the COO of the Knighttown CDC, and I thank you all, and especially Council Member Gilmore Richardson, for inviting me to testify this morning. I will also, realizing that you guys probably all have my written testimony, and in light of some of the details that have been shared, I just want to kind of emphasize the part of my written testimony. It kind of focuses on, it gave background on the Knighttown CDC, which a lot of you may be familiar with already, and the fact that we have been conducting a NAC program since 2003. But the supportive services and resources that we've been doing all those years are actually our niche and directly connected to our economic development, affordable housing, and other activities that we're engaged in. We realized the importance of collaboration and partnership in 2007 when we were awarded a contract from the city to operate a curfew center. The concept of the curfew center was to get the kids off the street and stop problems with violence, murder, and mayhem, and things of that nature, and providing them and their families with supportive services. It was a collaboration of city agencies, community-based organizations, and neighborhood volunteers. The Knighttown Curfew Center was staffed by 3 personnel, site coordinator, intake coordinator, and a receptionist, who often had to switch hats depending on the number of youth that were brought to the center. They were dedicated to being there for our young people, and I really want to emphasize that, to talk to them directly about why they were running the streets past curfew. And I just want to give an example of one of our curfew center staff, who was actually the truancy liaison from Simon Gratz High School, who left work to get a few hours sleep and then to get on post with her job at the curfew center from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. in the morning, then back to Gratz in a couple hours. The youth brought into our curfew center were surprised when they saw her and kind of embarrassed to see her, but they knew there was genuine love and concern for them. That kind of dedication to the safety and well-being of our youth was typical of our staff and volunteers who were residents, business owners, pastors, school leadership, etc. They established a strong family vibe, which was apparent and welcoming. So I also wanted to mention, while just jumping around off of my written testimony, that the youth were brought directly to the curfew centers. They weren't taken to the police station unless they had committed a crime or whatever. They were brought directly to the curfew centers, and there was an intake process to basically determine where they lived, a lot of times it was determined that they didn't live in the neighborhood where they were picked up. And that's something that needs to be paid attention to. But I just want to say that we know that many of our youth today have specific needs, including basic family support, trauma and mental health services and discipline, and some tough love. They may be living in an environment that encourages them to escape and roam the streets with their friends. Their parents may need resources to keep utility services on and support to find employment, food, clothing, and housing. Too often we hear about home environments with little or no discipline or even co-signing on drug abuse and a myriad of risky behaviors. The constant shootings and murders, often instigated and fueled by beef on social media, have become the norm, desensitizing our youth, families, and community. Our youth and their families are often on survival mode and have no knowledge of or do not even care about the available resources until they are in a crisis. Some may believe that no one really cares or can help. Many have been seriously traumatized by nonstop, senseless violence, COVID, and the problems I have mentioned in this testimony. They also avoid the negative perceptions and stigmas related to accessing certain resources, particularly for mental health services such as therapy. So I'm here today to encourage everyone, to encourage you to support the approval of Bill 210-503. This bill would have an immediate impact on improving the quality of life and safety in the communities that we all serve. We realize that you may not want the proposed resource centers to result in punitive enforcement. And we strongly suggest community service mandates for the youth as well as the parents, if necessary. And also with appropriate funding, the Knighttown CDC and a bunch of other resource-based organizations have the experience and are fully prepared to hit the ground running as the resource centers you need. And I also want to mention that we do a lot of collaboration and partnership, and we partner with the Black Male Community Council of Philadelphia that's housed in our facility. Also Men of Courage, other CDCs and organizations in the area that are providing supportive services and activities for youth. So we think this bill represents a great opportunity to really pay more attention to our youth and address the issues that may be affecting them and causing them to break curfew. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much for your testimony. The chair recognizes Councilwoman Katherine Gilmore Richardson.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to thank Majida Rashid for all of her work, even back to 2007. I was struck reading your testimony, particularly about grants. My mom is a grants graduate, the 72nd graduating class in 1964. So I was really excited to read your testimony, but really to see the breakdown of how the community and those in the community were involved with the community centers. And that's what made it so successful. And that's why I know it's important for us to rebuild this community infrastructure so that we have the infrastructure to help our young people. All of that infrastructure that we have previously no longer exists, and it's up to us to bring it back. So I just wanted to say thank you for your work, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Councilmember Richardson.
Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Well, Ms. Rashida, as always, you keep up the good work. Thank you for consistently staying on the front line and addressing this issue. And tell my good friend Zachary I said hello as well.
Will do. Thank you, Councilman.
You're welcome. Thank you for your testimony. Is there any other questions or comments from members of this committee? Hearing none, this concludes the hearing, and we will now go into a public meeting. I want to take a moment to invite all of the panel and witnesses to please disconnect from the meeting before we go into our public meeting. This concludes the public hearing of the committee. We will now go into a public meeting to consider the action to be taken on the bill before this committee today. Will the clerk please call the roll to take attendance? Members that are in attendance will please indicate they are by saying present when their names are called. Also, please say a few brief words when responding so that your image will be displayed on screen when you speak.
Councilmember Isaiah Thomas. Councilmember Derek.
Present.
Councilmember James.
Present.
Councilmember Helen Kim.
I am present.
Councilmember Kendra Brooks.
I am present.
And also in attendance, Councilmember Catherine Gilmore Richardson.
I am present. Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome. The chair recognizes Councilmember Kim for a motion on bill number 210503.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that bill number 210503 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council. Can I get a second?
Second, Councilmember Derek Green.
The chair notes for the record that Councilmember Derek Green seconds the motion, and it has been moved and properly seconded that bill number 210503 be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of this bill at the next session of council. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it, and the motion carries. This concludes the meeting. If there are no additional remarks, this officially concludes the business before the Committee on Public Safety. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the hard work of Councilwoman Katherine Gilmore Richardson and our leadership on this issue. I want to thank everyone else for their participation and their attendance in this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, colleagues. And I wanted to say a special thank you to my staff, to Eliza Alford, Taylor Dawkins, Santos Ramos, and the entire team. Thank you very, very much for your work.